Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with you, and Ken Mather is our storyteller today. We met in previous years talking about the origin of the cowboys and the evolution of them, but at that time we brought up the name of Cornelius O'Keefe, and we say we've got to tell this story one day. This is that day.
Good.
Now, Cornelius O'Keefe, give us a little background on where he came from and who he was.
Yeah, very important to understand where he came from to appreciate Cornelius O'Keefe and to kind of understand his personality. He came from a dirt poor Irish immigrant father who married a French-Canadian woman and lived in the Ottawa Valley. His father had worked as a navvy on the Rideau Canal and settled on 100 acres of land, and they'd lived pretty close to the poverty line, subsistence farming, couple of milk cows, maybe a steer that they could use, and a pig and some chickens for eggs, and that was about it. And out of those very humble origins, O'Keefe, the eldest son, decided that he would go out and make his way in the world and try to make something of himself.
Everybody was being attracted at this time to the gold rush of British Columbia, 1858, and right. Cornelius was no different.
That's right, and like thousands of others like him, he traveled to the Caribou, but the way he traveled is kind of interesting. He actually started off by going east instead of west to Montreal, and he took a boat down the east coast as far as Panama. Of course, there was no canal at the time, but there was a little railway across the Panama Isthmus, and he crossed there and then took another boat up to British Columbia and walked to the Caribou gold fields.
Just like thousands of other people.
That's right.
Well, what changed him? What kept him from sort of pursuing the lure of gold to his demise instead of doing a veer?
Well, he was a very intelligent young man, and he took a look around him when he got to the gold fields, and he saw that, yes, there were those getting rich in the gold mines, but most of them were the ones who'd been there for several years and staked the good ground. And O'Keefe was wise enough to see that the ones who were also getting rich were the merchants and the drovers who were bringing in cattle and those who were supplying the miners. And in the long run, they were the ones who ended up with the money.
Timeline right here, when does he arrive in Barkerville or in the Caribou?
Caribou 1861-62, right in that area when it's right at its height. Thousands and thousands of young men and women from all over the world converging on the gold fields of the Caribou.
Now, apart from having maybe day wages in his pocket, what's he got?
Not much, probably $1 or $2 in his pocket, so he has to go to work. He helps in the construction of the Caribou Wagon Road. He helps to construct the 115-mile stopping house and manages to scrabble together a few dollars, a bit of a nest egg that he can use to go on to bigger things.
Does he know where these bigger things are going to lead him?
No, he doesn't, and it's interesting. He's traveling to the newest gold excitement on the Big Bend of the Columbia, north of what we know as Revelstoke, when he runs into a man by the name of Thomas Wood. And Thomas Wood has a small drove of cattle that he's bringing to the Big Bend, only he needs help. And he asks O'Keefe, how would you like to give me a hand with these cattle since you're going to the Big Bend anyway? And O'Keefe and Thomas Wood travel by steamer up Seymour Arm and then drive these cattle over the height of land to the Big Bend excitement and make a nice tidy profit because they're looking for fresh beef. And turn right around and say, well, this worked.
Yeah.
Let's try it again. And they head south to purchase more cattle down in Oregon Territory.
Well, so it's a long trek back, horseback down to Oregon, find some more cattle, bring them back up.
That's right.
Through the Okanagan.
Mm-hmm. And the Brigade Trail, the old Drovers Trail, ran right through the heart of the Okanagan Valley. So they would have come right through the Okanagan heading south. Now there's some possibility O'Keefe had been over this trail before because the person who ran the 115-mile stopping house was McKinley, and he'd actually been a Hudson's Bay factor down in Oregon. And the story the family tell is that O'Keefe had gone down with him to Oregon and helped him move his belongings up here. So O'Keefe and Thomas Wood travel down into the Willamette Valley and buy beef. And while they're down there, they make friends with a third man. And this is a friendship that is to last for years and years. Thomas Greenhow.
Thomas Greenhow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Wood, Greenhow, and O'Keefe, who are now partnership, I guess?
Yep.
And driving cattle north to Barkerville or to the Caribou.
That's right. They're looking to drive their cattle to the Caribou. They've got about 180 head, which is probably every penny they owned went into cattle and a few supplies to get them there. And they cross the Columbia River. They swim their cattle across at the Dalles and head north. and up the Brigade Trail along the west side of Okanagan Lake. And they arrive at the head of the lake. And they're taken by the beauty of the country and what all good cattlemen see most of all, grass.
This is the grasslands of the interior, a miraculous natural event.
That's right. Bunch grass as high as the horse's underbelly, they all say. And so they say, well, wait a minute here. You know, we don't have a lot of money, but there's money in land. And there's money in grass if you're going to raise cattle. And someday, British Columbia will be a booming place where they'll need to have beef cattle.
They had this vision.
They must have had a vision, because why else settle in the middle of nowhere, really? In 1867, they decided, that's it, we're staying here, and we're going to make our lives happen here, or we're going to sink trying it.
So this triumvirate, the Wood, Greenhow, Cornelius O'Keefe triumvirate, are ensconced at the head of the lake.
At the head of the lake, in the wonderful bunch grass country that spreads all around the head of Okanagan Lake.
Okay, take a break here. Be back in just a second, because, I mean, the evolution of this trio and the evolution of Cornelius O'Keefe is a fascinating thing to behold. We'll do that right after this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Ken Mathers from the O'Keefe Ranch. 1867, Canada's birth year. What's the scenario at the head of the lake with our famous three?
Well, our three intrepid adventurers have settled down on 160 acres each, and they're beginning to build up their cattle herds. But what happens, of course, is the gold rush in British Columbia is beginning to fade, and most of the ranchers are finding they don't really have a market for their beef. So they begin to look for other ways to make a dollar. Now, they know that if they can stay long enough, the land will be worth something. But at this point, it doesn't really have great value.
Boy, this is the test of these three guys.
That's right. Most of the ranchers who came during the 1860s move on. But O'Keefe, Greenhow, and Wood stay. Although Thomas Wood takes a look around and says, even though there's thousands of acres of good grasses here, I don't think there's enough for all three of us. So he moves down beside a little lake that is now called Wood Lake. And so he separates, but O'Keefe and Greenhow stay. And to make a few extra dollars, they open a little general store at the ranch, and they sell a few goods to the Indian people who live nearby and to the traders and settlers who are in the area. But the real important event is when Canada and British Columbia get together in 1871. There's a need for a post office, and O'Keefe is a man who's driven. And he puts together a petition for a post office in the Okanagan, and it's approved. And so the first post office in the Okanagan Valley is established at O'Keefe Ranch in 1872.
And it's called?
Okanagan, appropriately enough. What's interesting is this, the scribe who writes down the official charter for this post office in Ottawa misspells it. And it spells it A-G-O-N. And that's how the Okanagan post office is spelt for about the next 25 years before they finally correct it to our modern day spelling.
I sense that that's how many of our names came to be, because somebody in civil service just didn't know how to spell particularly well.
Yeah.
1871, so the things are starting to roll along. What is O'Keefe doing at this time besides raising cattle?
Well, he's beginning to get into other things as well. He sees that there's potential for wheat growing in the area with the climate. So he begins to grow a little bit of wheat. But he also does something that's interesting as well. He takes an Indian woman as a wife, and most of the early ranchers did. And that gives him an alliance with the Okanagan people, who of course are still in the majority at the time, and it also gives him someone to look after his home. Now this is what we would call a common law relationship, and but it is something that is very common and also allows O'Keefe, who's a virile young man, to look after other needs that he has as well.
And he has a couple of kids.
That's right, they have a couple of kids, a daughter and a son, and the daughter goes on to marry Isaac Harris, who's becomes a chief of the Okanagan people. Well, not to their liking very much, but that's another story.
Right.
But O'Keefe begins to build up his herd, and he begins to acquire more and more land, because every dollar he makes, he can buy an acre of land. In those days, unoccupied government land, which was all in those days other than the reserve lands, could be bought for $1 an acre. So he begins to acquire land and hangs on during the 1870s. In the early 1880s, things completely change. The railway is being constructed through British Columbia, and there's a need for beef for the thousands of men who are working on the railway. And suddenly there's a boom in the cattle industry.
And now, it's all of that land is just put into full-blown production.
That's right. O'Keefe is in the right place at the right time. He supplies cattle, makes good money, buys more land. By the time the railway comes through in 1885, O'Keefe has got close to 12,000 acres of prime Okanagan bottomland, and well-watered, all of it, because he carefully, strategically buys up the land that is adjacent to water.
And so he's now, obviously, a cattle baron at this
right.
stage of the game.
Yep.
He needs, perhaps, from his point of view, someone a little finer
That's
than his
right.
Indian bride.
That's right.
His Indian common-law wife.
Yep. So what he does is he travels back to his home near Ottawa and comes back with the bride, Mary Ann. And Mary Ann O'Keefe is officially married to him, and the Indian wife, as we would call her, is looked after by O'Keefe, but does no longer live at the ranch. And Mary Ann is a wonderful woman, a true pioneer woman in her own right. And she begins to bear him children. And she has her first 8 children in the span of 10 years. And one more for good measure. Now, one of these dies in infancy, but 8 of the 9 children survive.
This is miraculous in itself. I mean, there are no doctors. She has these children at home, probably.
She has them at home. Probably an Indian midwife assists with the birth, and then on to the day's chores.
Now, these children, obviously, they've got a job to do, so this becomes his employees and
That's right.
his workers on the farm.
Put them to work. But Cornelius is always a man who appreciates education because he sees that as the key to success. And so he makes sure that his children are well educated. Some of them are sent away to boarding school in Ottawa. The daughters are raised in convents in Ottawa, but all of them are given a good foundation of education. But some of the sons, his oldest son, Charlie, is a cowboy from day one. And Charlie and Frank, his brother, work for Dad. And so O'Keefe's got ready-made employees growing up in the ranch as well.
And people to inherit the ranch and to carry on the name.
That's right.
Which he's immensely proud of.
Yes, he is. And he's beginning to get social status, which is very important to a dirt-poor Irish immigrant son.
Okay, we're going to talk about his status, and we're going to talk about the sad passing of his first wife and on to another generation when we come back from this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Ken Mather of the O'Keefe Ranch. We're talking about Cornelius O'Keefe, and we've got some photos here. So 1886, he's been making money from the CPR with the beef and stuff, and look at the mansion. And then this is a mansion in 1886 that he builds.
Now, the Kamloops Sentinel newspaper calls it the finest in the inland country. So he builds a mansion for his wife, Mary Ann, and they move in there, and kids continue to accumulate in the bedrooms. But what happens, it's interesting, in 1889, Thomas Greenhow, his lifelong partner, passes away. And Elizabeth Greenhow, who in fact was O'Keefe's niece, and married Thomas Greenhow, continues and carries on. But she has a grand mansion constructed because she's doing well as well. And right next door to the O'Keefe mansion is the Greenhow mansion, which is quite a bit nicer.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So that will never do. And what we do know about Cornelius is it's very important that he has the best of everything. So in 1896, he reconstructs and adds to his mansion and makes it quite much like Elizabeth Greenhow's.
I see he's taken the little cottage roof edge off, straightened it out, added a whole new wing out the back.
Yeah, yeah. And it looks about as nice as the Greenhow as well. So the two of them sit side by side in their luxury. And Mary Ann O'Keefe finally begins to enjoy life a little bit. Her kids are now all there, and she's well-to-do, she can dress well, and she begins to hobnob with some of the upper crust people in the Okanagan. She sits on a board for the Vernon Jubilee Hospital with Lady Aberdeen, the Governor General's wife, and begins to enjoy life a bit.
I mean, having this vice-regal couple here, right here in the Okanagan, is just a wonderful thing for the Okanagan, but for everyone else as well.
That's right. And the status, of course, that comes with sitting on a board with Lady Aberdeen herself.
Do you think Lady Aberdeen and Cornelius ever sort of exchanged words?
They may have exchanged words. I have a feeling they were in very distinct social classes as far as Lady Aberdeen would have seen things.
But having, you know, that kind of vice-regal people there, they attracted other vice-regal and regal people.
That's right. In fact, there was a very large population of English aristocracy who came to the Okanagan Valley. And the O'Keefes would have been very much at home with them because they were the landed gentry of the Okanagan. But unfortunately, what happens is at the age of 49, Mary Ann O'Keefe passes away. And the Okanagan mourns the death of one of the first white ladies to come to the valley.
Cornelius doesn't let this loss stop him for long.
No. He's 63 years old. One might think he was approaching retirement, but not so. There's still a glint in his blue Irish eyes. He goes back to Ottawa and finds a pretty young bride, 23-year-old Elizabeth Tierney. And she comes back to the Okanagan and is a real trophy. She's a very beautiful woman. She's artistic and talented. And they lead a life of leisure to some extent because they're very well-to-do.
All right. How well-to-do? Can we put this in some kind of terms? How big a cattle baron is he?
Well, he owns probably 12,000 acres of land in his own name at the turn of the century. Some of that's sold off in the early 1900s because what's happening is the pressure is on for the great cattle ranches of the Okanagan to be broken up and used for orchard land. So O'Keefe sells off bits and pieces, and finally in 1907, he sells to the Land and Agricultural Company of Canada, the L&A, 5,700 acres and makes $184,000. A nice return on that dollar an acre that he paid to get the land.
184,000 would represent what in today's terms? What multiplier do we put on this?
You're probably talking $18 million in today's money, yeah.
Breathtaking.
A lottery in money coming in.
Now Elizabeth and Cornelius, I mean more Elizabeth, she is sort of the queen of the Okanagan.
That's right, yeah. Very, very well-to-do. I might mention, though, they have 6 more children.
How many is that in all?
That would make 17 that Cornelius
has
fathered. That's right. And the last one, interestingly enough, is born in 1913, Eileen, and her dad is 76 years old.
Good heavens.
Quite an inspiration to all of us. Old Cornelius never lost stride. He just kept on going.
Now, and he continued, I mean, despite the fact he's well over retirement here, he keeps an active interest in aspects of the farm?
He does.
The ranch, I'm sorry.
They carry on ranching. He's growing wheat. He has a general store, the post office, and with his money he's buying town lots in Vernon, and he's intrigued by another new invention called the cinema. And he builds the first moving picture theaters in Vernon and Kamloops, the Empress Theater, at great expense. And, you know, again, a man who was very fascinated with technology.
So the theater, you see, I find this enigmatic, you know, that he comes from such dirt poor sources, and yet he has such a huge world vision, a vision of what's possible.
He does. He's a man who could see the future and the potential that the future held. And of course, movies today, we can look and say, there's a man who knew what was coming.
He knew what was coming.
Yeah.
And so 1913, his last child is born. What's his health like? Where's he going?
He's starting to fade. He's in his 70s, and he's had a very hard, long life. And so he resigns as postmaster of Okanagan Post Office after 40 years of holding the post. And he begins to settle into retirement in every sense. And his wife Elizabeth begins to take over more and more of the management of the ranch as Cornelius begins to lose some of his faculties. The sad thing is the First World War comes and the bottom falls out of the market in the Okanagan Valley. So much of O'Keefe's fortune is tied up in land holdings and buildings, and there's no cash flow. So when he finally dies in 1919, there's a legacy that's left behind, but not a great cash legacy to his children, his many children. Really just the land holdings, which are now not really bringing in any great income.
So what happens? What happened to that $18 million of a few years ago?
Well, it's amazing. The Empress Theaters in Kamloops and in Vernon are sold just to cover taxes. and land is lost because the taxes can't be met because the economy of the Okanagan is so flat. So Elizabeth O'Keefe, who carries on from Cornelius running the ranch, is having to scramble to make ends meet, which is the incredible irony of the whole thing.
Yeah. And really, the fact that the O'Keefe Ranch exists at all today is reasonably miraculous.
That's right. It's a legacy to Elizabeth and her son Tierney, who carried on through the dirty 30s and the 1940s, but wouldn't let go of that nucleus of buildings that were there. And Tierney carried on ranching right up until modern times and had the bright idea of opening the place as a tourist attraction.
And it's the
Still
Devonian
there.
Foundation in Calgary comes through,
That's
not the
right.
British Columbia government or anybody.
No. And it is interesting that 100 years to the day from when Cornelius rode down the trail, the O'Keefe Ranch is opened as a tourist attraction in 1967 by W.A.C. Bennett himself, a bit of a rancher in his own right.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
We've got a number of items here. Cornelius O'Keefe believed he needed to be identified on everything.
That's right. We have his whiskey flask, which looks well used. We have a glasses case. Interestingly enough, he never actually wore glasses, but he had a glasses case for his darks glasses.
Did he regularly go to Burke's to have these kinds of
Burke's
things?
silver was considered the very finest, and he bought a complete set of silverware for his young bride, Elizabeth, that graces the O'Keefe Ranch dining room table to this day.
So it's a wonderful, and to this day, people are invited to the O'Keefe Ranch because that was a function back in those days.
That's right. Cornelius was a great entertainer. He had a Christmas open house that everyone in the area was invited to come and visit and drink a glass of champagne. It's said that he was a man who was tight with his dollars, a good money manager, but when he threw a party, it was champagne for everyone. And I think that's as good a legacy as anyone could wish to have.
Ken Mather, what an interesting story. And you raise so many other great characters that some of these characters are going to be the future of Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Ken Mather is the curator of the historic O'Keefe Ranch in Vernon, and the story today has been its founder, Cornelius O'Keefe. Back next time. See you then.